My name is Marin Calloway. I'm 59 years old, and I've spent most of my life caring for others, raising my son, managing our household, and lending a helping hand whenever it was needed. I've always taken pride in being dependable, organized, and patient. But that morning, as I stood in my Charleston kitchen, I felt a flutter of excitement that had nothing to do with chores or routines. Today, I was calling Max to ask about his wedding, expecting to share in his joy, maybe even offer some last-minute advice. I dialed his number, my fingers trembling just a little, despite the calm I usually prided myself on. The line clicked, and then Lena's voice answered, cheerful, casual, almost breezy. "Hello, Marin," she said. There was something in the tone, a lightness that should have been welcoming, but instead it sent a shiver down my spine. "Hi, Lena," I said, trying to sound bright. I wanted to check on Max. "When's the wedding?" There was a pause on the other end, and then Lena's words hit me like a wave. "Oh, we got married yesterday. We only invited special people." I froze the phone, slipping slightly in my hand. Special people. I blinked at the faded tile of my kitchen floor, trying to process the sentence. My heart thudded painfully as my mind replayed the past 3 years, the rent I covered the furniture. I bought the meals I stocked in their fridge. I had imagined standing proudly beside Max on his wedding day, a mother honored and included. And now, I wasn't special. Max didn't speak. I could hear him shuffling in the background, avoiding my gaze, while Lena's casual, almost smug tone filled the line. The words repeated themselves in my head louder than any sound only special people. For a moment, I felt like I'd been shoved out of my own life, watching from the outside as the family I loved celebrated without me. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the morning sunlight harsh against the counters where I had poured my love and energy for so long. I set the phone down on the marble countertop, gripping it as if holding on to reality itself. I had supported them for years, and yet here I was, invisible. Slowly, the initial shock began to settle into something heavier, something that would demand thought-reckoning, and perhaps action. I sank into the faded armchair by the window, letting the morning light wash over me, but it did nothing to warm the cold pit in my chest. Memories of the past 3 years rushed in, each sharper than the last. I remembered the first time Max had asked me to cover their rent when he lost his job. I had nodded without hesitation, transferring the $500 as if it were nothing, as if my own needs could wait forever. I could still picture the living room in their apartment, the sofa I had chosen, the coffee table I had insisted on, the lamps I picked that Max claimed were perfect. Every piece of furniture carried a trace of me, a silent reminder that I had cared, that I had given without complaint. I had stocked their fridge week after week, turning away from my own grocery list, making sure there was always milk, eggs, and bread. Birthday presents, holiday gifts, little indulgences I knew they wouldn't have bought, all laid out, waiting for smiles. I sometimes never received. And now, after every dollar spent, every small act of love, they had excluded me from the most important day of Max's life, a wedding I had dreamed of sharing with him, imagining standing beside him proud and honored. But the photos on social media told a different story. Lena's parents posed with the bride and groom, siblings toasted with champagne, and somewhere in the midst of it, I had been erased. I clenched my hands in my lap, grounding myself in the reality of betrayal. All the late nights balancing bills, the extra hours I had worked, the meals I had skipped, gone unnoticed. My love and support had been treated like currency, a resource to be spent without acknowledgement, without gratitude. Anger simmered quiet at first, then spreading like wildfire. Disappointment had become fury. My devotion had been misread as entitlement, my kindness mistaken for weakness. For the first time that morning, I felt a delicate but unyielding resolve form, like a seed pushing through winter soil. Something had to change. I leaned back, staring out at the quiet Charleston street, imagining life for myself. No longer merely a bank account or invisible hand. The thought lingered sharp and invigorating. This was only the beginning. I cleared the kitchen table, stacking a few papers, and opening a notebook that had been gathering dust for months. The sunlight streamed through the half-open blinds, catching the edges of receipts and statements scattered across the surface. I sat down, pen in hand, and began tallying every dollar I had sent to Max and Lena over the past 3 years. Rent first. 3 years of monthly payments, $500 each, totaling $18,000. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote it down, the number heavier than the weight of the checks themselves. Then groceries, $200 a month for food and household essentials, $7,200. Gifts for birthdays. Christmas anniversaries, at least $3,000. The small emergencies that had cropped up unexpectedly, from broken appliances to car repairs, nearly $2,000 more. And Lena's personal expenses, medical, co-pays, the last-minute purchases I had covered without question, $800. $33,400. Every cent taken from my savings, my hard-earned retirement, the cushion I had built for my own future. And what had it bought me? Gratitude, recognition, no. It had bought comfort for 2 adults who hadn't hesitated to exclude me from the most important day of my son's life. Anger began to bubble beneath the calm exterior I tried to maintain. I thought of the late nights I had worked, the skipped meals, the small pleasures I had denied myself so that Max and Lena could have everything. I had been generous, yes, but I had also been invisible, a silent provider whose worth was measured only in dollars. As I wrote down each sum, the realization settled in, clear and cold. I had been exploited. My love had been transactional, my kindness mistaken for obligation. The betrayal wasn't just in the wedding or the social media posts. It was in every check, every favor, every moment I had given freely, now ignored and dismissed. I leaned back, staring at the numbers as if they were carved into stone, feeling both shock and clarity. The anger was no longer aimless, it was focused. I understood with a precision that left no room for doubt that something had to change. The next step would not be easy, but it would be mine to take. The next morning, I drove to the small branch of the bank I had frequented for decades. The building was familiar, a quiet brick structure on the corner of King Street. But today it felt different, like stepping into a space where I could finally take control. I approached the teller, a young woman with a kind smile, and asked to review my automatic transfers. She led me to a small desk and listened patiently as I explained that I wanted to cancel the recurring payments to my son and his wife. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't question me. "Of course, Mrs. Calloway," she said, typing quickly, verifying my identity and confirming the account numbers. One by one, the transfers were halted, the lines of money that had flowed steadily out of my account now cut off. I sat back in the chair, watching the final confirmation print from the machine. The numbers on the page felt like a map of my independence, a record that the years of unquestioned support were ending, not because I was cruel, but because I had finally recognized my own worth. As I walked home along the cobblestone streets of Charleston, I thought of all the nights I had stayed up balancing their bills, of the times I skipped my own meals to make sure they had enough. I remembered every phone call, every emergency, every small sacrifice I had made, without complaint. And now, for the first time in years, those efforts were not just for them. They were a reminder of what I deserved for myself. Sitting at my kitchen table that evening, I felt a strange mixture of nervousness and empowerment. The weight of obligation that had pressed on me for so long was lifting, replaced by the clarity of boundaries I had finally drawn. It was only a small first step, but it was mine, and it felt powerful. I closed my eyes and imagined the days ahead, each one a chance to live for myself. Not as a provider or an invisible hand, but as Marin Calloway, fully seen, fully present, finally free to choose. The chime of the doorbell made my stomach twist. It was too early for friends, too late for deliveries. I opened the door to find Max standing there, his expression tight with Lena at his side, and a man in a gray suit holding a briefcase. My heart stuttered. "Hi, Mom," Max said cautiously, avoiding my eyes. Lena stepped forward, her usual confident smile strained as if she were performing a role. "We need to talk," she said. I stepped aside, letting them in, though every instinct told me not to. The lawyer's shoes clicked against the hardwood as he followed, surveying my living room as if he were inspecting evidence. I stood by the table, my hands curled into fists at my sides. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Max shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we thought it would be better to handle some things in person." Like what I asked, gesturing toward the lawyer. "Finances. My personal documents. Because nothing leaves this room without my consent." Lena's smile faltered. "We just wanted to make sure everything is safe." I laughed softly, sharp and bitter. "Safe? You mean under your control? For years I've given freely, and now you arrive uninvited thinking I will hand over my autonomy along with my money." The lawyer cleared his throat, glancing between us. "Mrs. Calloway, we are here to discuss a power of attorney temporary, just until certain matters are clarified. I will sign nothing," I said, stepping closer, my gaze unwavering. "Not now, not ever, without my lawyer present. I am fully capable of managing my finances, my home, and my life. You have no right to this room, these papers, or my consent without me saying so." Lena's eyes narrowed and her voice took on that coaxing tone I had heard too many times over the years. "Mom, you don't understand. We're trying to protect you. Don't you see? We only want what's best." I shook my head slowly. "No. What you want is what's best for you, Max. For Lena. Not me. I am not your resource. I am not invisible, and I will not be treated as either." For a moment, the room was still, the lawyer blinking in surprise, Max fidgeting like a child caught in a lie, and Lena staring at me, her confidence wavering. The truth hung between us, heavy and undeniable. I took a deep breath, feeling a spark of courage ignite in my chest. This was my house, my money, my life. No one was taking it from me, not today, not ever. The letter arrived mid-morning, slipped under my front door with an official weight that made my chest tighten. It was from a local family court, addressed to me with formal language that felt cold and impersonal. Max and Lena had filed for legal guardianship, requesting control over my finances. My hands shook as I unfolded the crisp paper, scanning the details. Each line made my pulse quicken. Their names, the petition, the lawyer's signature. I sat at the kitchen table, the stack of past bills, receipts, and bank statements from the last 3 years spread before me like evidence of my life. Every rent check, every grocery delivery, every small gift now held a new weight. I had given freely, generously, thinking it was love. Now the same generosity was being twisted against me. I called Mr. Weber, an attorney I had worked with years ago during a minor property dispute, and explained the situation. His calm voice carried reassurance, but I could hear the seriousness beneath. "Marin," he said, "this is elder financial exploitation. Filing for guardianship is a tactic sometimes out of concern, sometimes out of greed. We need to document everything." I spent the afternoon gathering documents, photographing receipts, scanning bank statements, and making detailed notes of every transaction I had ever made for Max and Lena. I recalled every instance they had asked for money, the repairs, the emergency bills, the last-minute wedding contributions. Each dollar once given with love now became proof of my independence and their pattern of manipulation. Mr. Weber arrived at my home later that day, carrying a thick folder and a calm, measured demeanor. We spread everything out on the kitchen table, reviewing dates, amounts, and supporting notes. "We will build a complete record," he said, "showing that you are financially competent and that their request is based on self-interest, not concern." As we worked, a mixture of fear and determination settled over me. Fear because the legal process felt intimidating, and the possibility of losing autonomy loomed. Determination because I knew I could no longer allow myself to be controlled or treated as invisible. For the first time, I realized that protecting myself required more than anger. It required strategy. By the evening, I had a comprehensive plan: organize evidence, prepare witness statements, and coordinate with Mr. Weber to present a clear, factual defense. I also took a moment to breathe, to remind myself that this fight was mine, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. I looked around my kitchen, the room where so many sacrifices had been made, and felt a strange sense of power. The confrontation was no longer only emotional. It was a battle I could prepare for, a path that would lead to both protection and justice. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple black blazer and a blouse that made me feel steady and grounded. Mr. Weber arrived at my house promptly, his calm presence a tether against the nervous energy twisting in my stomach. The drive to the courthouse felt surreal, the streets of Charleston unusually quiet, as if the city itself had paused to watch. Inside the courtroom, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and anticipation. Max and Lena were already seated, their expressions guarded. The lawyer from the petition sat beside them, his tone measured and practiced. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past 3 years settle around me, but also a strange lightness. This was the moment I had prepared for. Witnesses were called. First, Eleanor Brooks, my next-door neighbor, described instances when Max and Lena relied on me for financial support, and then dismissed my input as if it were inconsequential. My friend Cynthia from the garden club confirmed that my mental state was sharp, organized, and entirely capable. Even my pharmacist, Mr. Green, recounted being asked by Lena to sign misleading statements about my medication purchases. Each testimony chipped away at the narrative Max and Lena had tried to build. When it was my turn, I stood and walked to the witness stand with a steadiness I hadn't known I possessed. Mr. Weber guided me through the questions, allowing me to tell the story of 3 years of support, the wedding exclusion, and the sudden attempt to claim control over my finances. I spoke clearly, recounting dates, amounts, and actions with precision. I felt a growing sense of empowerment as the courtroom absorbed the truth. The cross-examination was tense. Max tried to cast doubt on my competence. Lena attempted to frame my actions as paranoia. I answered calmly, pointing to the documented evidence and the consistent testimony of friends and neighbors. The contrast was undeniable, their manipulation exposed, my competence verified. Finally, the judge leaned forward, scanning the files, and then looking at me with a steady gaze. "It is clear," he said, his voice firm, "that Mrs. Marin Calloway is fully capable of managing her own affairs. The request for guardianship is denied in full." Relief washed over me in waves, mingling with a fierce, joyous triumph. The room seemed brighter somehow, the air lighter, as if the legal affirmation of my autonomy had lifted the weight of years spent invisible. I sat back in the courtroom, my chest still tight with adrenaline, but a radiant calm spreading from my core. For the first time in years, I felt entirely, unquestionably free. The first morning in my new apartment felt like stepping into a life I had long imagined, but never allowed myself to claim. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating hardwood floors I hadn't walked on in decades. Boxes still lined the walls, but each one carried a sense of possibility rather than obligation. I unpacked, slowly taking my time to arrange the space exactly as I wanted, for the first time making choices entirely for myself. Ethan, the young technician from the security company, arrived mid-morning to install cameras and a modern alarm system. Watching him move through the apartment, carefully setting sensors and testing alerts, I felt a strange mix of relief and empowerment. This was my domain, my life, and no one could intrude without my consent. Afterwards, I ventured to the garden club, reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in years. Cynthia greeted me with a warm smile, and for the first time, our conversation was entirely mine, not about Bill's requests or emergencies. We laughed over tea, discussed books, and shared stories about our lives. It felt rich and sustaining, a nourishment I hadn't realized I had been missing. I returned home in the afternoon and set up a small table by the window for painting. Brushes, paints, and canvases sprawled across it, waiting for my hands to bring life to color. I dipped a brush in blue, watching the pigment spread across the canvas, and felt a deep, steady satisfaction. Each stroke reminded me that I could create, that I could invest in joy without guilt. As evening fell, I stood on the balcony, watching the Charleston skyline bathe in gold. I thought of the past months, the betrayal, the confrontations, the courtroom, and a quiet pride settled in me. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my autonomy. For the first time in years, independence was not a burden or a fear. It was a source of joy that went far beyond money, far beyond the control others had once tried to assert. I sat at my small desk by the window, journal, open pen poised. The city hummed softly below Charleston's familiar rhythm, comforting in its constancy. I traced the path of the last few months in careful words, the shock of exclusion, the cold reality of being taken for granted, the anger that had burned in secret. Each entry brought clarity, a steady acknowledgement of how far I had come. I paused to think of my friends, Cynthia, Eleanor, Maria, women who had reminded me of the value of connection and respect. Their laughter, advice, and quiet support had been a balm to the wounds inflicted by family betrayal. I felt gratitude that ran deep, a sense of belonging built not on obligation, but on genuine care. Closing my journal, I stood on the balcony, breathing in the evening air. I pictured the months ahead, painting without interruption. Dinners with friends, quiet walks along the waterfront. Independence stretched before me like open water, vast and inviting. For the first time in years, I felt entirely free, not just from control, but from the weight of proving my worth to others. I smiled, certain of one truth: I had reclaimed my life, and nothing could take that from me.